Welcome to DIYeasycrafts.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make an easy carved wood waving American flag. Now what makes this particular project so nice in my eyes is that you don't need any special tools. This is a very good first attempt at making an American flag, this project. This flag is different from most carved wood American flags. Use 2x4s or 2x6s that they cut down. And when you're using a 2x4, you usually have to either trim off the rounds or run it through a planer to make them nice and flat so they can glue together nicely. And then you've got a lot of wood to remove. So a lot of times you use a table saw to remove the bulk of that material. You still end up with a very heavy flag. What I decided to do was use 1x2s. Now this is finished lumber, so you don't have to run it through a planer. Also, if you take a look at the width of the 1x2, it's virtually the same as the thickness of the 2x4. So the overall dimensions of the flag that we're going to make are the same as you would end up with 2x4 construction. But you don't need a table saw, you don't need a planer. It just makes the whole project a lot easier and you end up with a lighter flag. Now this project started out, I went online and I found a flag calculator. To come up with the dimensions, I'm going to put in the size, the actual size of the width of the 1x2, which is 1.5 inches. When you put that in, you end up with the dimensions that you need for the flag, which is basically 37 by 19.5, and also the dimensions for the union, which is the blue area. Before I go any further, I make a decent amount of patriotic themed crafts, especially knives and knife handles. If you guys are interested in seeing any of those, check us out on my website called DIYeasycrafts.com. And I've got links to how-to videos on each one of these projects. So I marked off the length. I know the flag's 37. I actually cut the wood at 39. I give myself a little bit of wiggle room. And I can cut that to size later, or I can grind it to size when I'm evening up the boards. I used a chop saw, but you could use a hand saw or a circular saw. You know, any way that you have to cut all these boards to length, as close to making them the same as possible. I'm using 3 pipe vices. These are very inexpensive. I got these down at Home Depot a few years back when I was making some cutting boards. And I'm going to clamp all of the pieces horizontal. This is going to be basically the size of the flag that we're going to end up with. I'm not doing any gluing at this time. I'm going to turn the project upside down, and with a marker, I'm just going to mark, I'm going to number each piece, 1, 2, 3. You end up needing a total of 13 stripes. I don't know if I mentioned it before, so you need buy 17 of these 1x2s. They're about $3 a piece. On the ends, I'm going to mark the waves, and I'm going to continue that along the whole outside perimeter of the flag. These are the areas that you're going to grind. Just a visual reference. I'm also going to run those lines. If you take a close look where I drew them on the front edge of that wood, where's how I want the groove to go. I'm going to angle back the first one and slightly less on the second one. And I'm just going to put some X's so I know which areas I have to grind. Again, just a real quick visual reference. This is probably the most important tool. It cost me about $15 for this wood carving disc that mounted onto any standard 4.5-inch angle grinder. This thing is a beast. It removes a lot of material very quickly. Use a very light touch. And you want to grind just with the tip of it. If you let the base touch, it will grab and move on you. But with a very little bit of practice, you can control it pretty nicely. I've done a lot of wood grinding, mostly with flap sanding wheels, but this was the first time I used a grinding disc like this, and really pleased with it. Just remove the material very quickly. You don't have to be an artist. You want to grind down so that the thickness of the board is about 1/2 inch thick at the least amount. the bottom of the groove, because you got to leave a little bit of room to sand these grooves smooth, not only with a flap sanding wheel, but then also with an oscillating sander. And you want to end up with wood that's somewhere in the 3/8 thickness. Probably took me a half hour to rough shape the entire flag. And now on the other end, and you can see how you can still see some flats in between the grooves. You know, when you're doing the rest of the grinding, whether it be with the flap sanding wheel or the oscillating sander, this is the flap sanding wheel, you want to make sure you get rid of all of those flats, that you round over all of the edges so that it's really just curves. Now, the flap sanding wheel that I'm using is very worn. In fact, it was almost completely worn out. A good one, you know, an 80 grit flap sanding wheel would smooth out all of these rough grind lines very, very quickly. I ended up using just an oscillating sander with an 80 grit disc on it. And it probably took me a little bit longer than it would have, you know, if I had a fresh flap sanding wheel, but it still did the job relatively quickly. You can see here some of those deep gouges made by the first disc, and how quickly that 80 grit paper smooths everything over. So I sanded everything with an 80 grit, then I went to a 120, and then I real quickly went over everything with a 220. And of course I spent the majority of the time with the 80. And you can see that the flag is starting to take shape now. So the con, or the downside of using 1x2s is you're definitely not going to end up with a flag that has as deep curves or waves as you would with thicker wood, like a 2x4. But you know, I think you're going to end up with a really nice piece, and it's certainly going to look like a carved wood flag should look. I highlighted the depth of each one of those depressions just by adding a little bit of darkness with a torch. You don't have to do this, but you know, I thought it adds a little bit of character. There's also a bunch of variety of ways that you can finish these things. You can paint them, you can stain them, you can use a combination of paint and stain. That's all individual preference. What I've done now is I put a little bit of painter's tape on each white stripe. And I'm going to remove all of the white stripes and just move them out of the way so I don't make any mistakes. I'm going to use red stain to stain all of the red boards. Before I do that, I marked the length of the union, the blue area, and I'm just going to hammer in a razor blade on each board, on each of the 3 or 4 boards up top that line up with the union. This is an attempt to keep the stain from running onto the area that's going to be blue. This works really well if you're painting, but really stain, it's really hard to keep from seeping through. But I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to make our own red stain. I had some very light wood stain. I'm just going to, you know, pour a little bit. There's no magic formula here. A little bit into a container. I did go out and buy some oil-based red paint. Doesn't matter what kind of paint you get, as long as it's oil-based. You can add that right into the wood stain and then stir it up. And you're creating, this way, your own red stain. That stain is going to drag the color deep into the wood so that after you stain it and wipe it off, you should be able to see the wood grain, which is really what I'm looking for. You know, if you painted this, you might as well just paint a piece of plywood. You just don't have the character that you would have if you can see the grain through the stain. On the red stripes, both top and bottom, you do want to do the edges because you are going to end up seeing those. The inside edge, you really just, the first 1/4 of an inch or so has to have some stain on it, just so that when we finally glue these things together, if one isn't lined up completely, you're not going to see any of the white wood through it. Now, the plain wood, the white pieces, you can leave plain, or you could stain them with a very, very light stain, or you could even whitewash them. Or, as I mentioned before, you could paint them white, your choice. After I wiped off all of the excess stain, I'm going to let these dry completely. But you can see the wood grain through the stain. And that's what I was looking for. So now I'm going to assemble all of the pieces. I'm just using wood glue. I placed all of the pieces back onto the pipe clamps. I'm going to run wood glue down each piece. And then when I put the next piece on, I'm just going to line it up end to end so that they're as even as possible. You can't be perfect with this stuff, but you just try to do the best you can. I was surprised at how quickly this whole project went. You know, even with the drying time, you know, the stain and the glue, I got this whole thing done in 2 days. And really, added up, it was really just maybe 2.5 hours worth of work. Most of the time was spent drying time. Once the final piece is glued and in position, you just going to want to tighten up, you know, each one of those 3 clamps and walk away from it, let it dry. This is probably the most important step. You know, this is the one I wasn't so sure that these 1x2s would hold together when gluing them together horizontally rather than vertically. Anyway, all the glue that squeezed out, I wiped off the majority with a paper towel, and then I used a moistened rag to get off any excess glue. And now the flag is really starting to take shape. And it's going to get better than this. Once the glue is dry, you can remove it from those pipe clamps, and we're going to flip it over. Put down an old towel or something that's going to protect that surface, the top surface of the flag. Now we're going to go back to the original wood grinding tool, and we're going to just chamfer the edges on the back. If you notice, you want to follow the curve. So anywhere where the wood curves, you want to keep that edge a uniform width. Just be careful that tool doesn't grab onto your towel. So I'm just going to follow each one of those curves and make the width of the wood somewhere in that 3/8 to 1/2 inch range, but by eye as consistent as possible. You don't have to do a lot of grinding here. Most of it is never going to be seen. It's just so that when it's sitting on the wall or hung on the wall, it adds some character and it gives the illusion that the entire wood, both sides, is carved. So you're only chamfering, you're only going in, you know, a couple of inches, making that whole edge a uniform thickness or width. When you flip that over, because I don't want people to be able to look underneath and see the white wood, I just decided to burn it with a torch. You could paint it dark, you could paint it red, you know, whatever you wanted to do. But I think torching it worked out pretty well. So here you can see that the waves are actually accentuated by also carving the backside, you know, the backside of the wood. Now the stars I used for mine, I cut out with a vinyl cutting machine called a Silhouette Cameo, which gives me the ability to cut these stars out in any size I want. But you can buy self-adhesive stars on Etsy. You can even buy a union template, which means that you could paint the stars. If you were doing white stars, you could just paint them, lay the template over. What I wanted was, I didn't want white stars. I wanted the wood grain in the stars and a dark blue background. So I'm going to lay all of these stars in position, then I'm going to spray paint over them the background of the union, and then I'm going to peel each one of these stars. I did end up using some of that light stain on all of the white stripes and the white area. This is a dark blue. It was a navy blue spray paint that I found at, I think this one I got at Ace Hardware. spray this on. I've taped off all areas of the flag that I didn't want to be dark blue. And I walked away from that and let it dry completely. And then I'm just going to use a tweezer and I'm just going to peel off each one of those stars. Now, if you wanted white stars, like I said, you could paint that whole area white, then put the stars on, then paint it blue, and then when you peeled the stars, it would show white underneath it. The other option would be to paint the entire area blue and then get one of the stencils that you can get on Etsy and then just paint the white stars through the stencil. Either way, a lot of times when you watch videos on how to make these things, people actually grind out all of the stars with a Dremel tool, which is a great way of doing it, but it just takes a long time, and I don't think you ever get the stars, you know, as crisp as you do with paint. Just my opinion. And this project I wanted to make is, like I said, as easy as possible. Final step or final process, I'm just going to spray some high gloss clear lacquer over the entire flag, and I ended up doing a couple of coats. And this is the finished product. So you got wood grain that you can see through the stars, as well as all of the white stripes. You've got 13 stripes, red both top and bottom, and the blue union. For a first attempt at making a wood American flag, I was pretty happy with the results. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. I certainly hope you did. I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I would absolutely love to hear comments in the comments section. I'd like to give you an invite to check us out on the web at DIYeasycrafts.com. I've got a whole bunch of do-it-yourself projects on there, including quite a few patriotic themed projects. Thank you very much for watching.